Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with Che and Shy, the after show for the Che Day segment on The Beat with Ari Melber. I'm here with Chetanjan Commandori, a political strategist, and I am Shia Porn-Turgansadit, D-list YouTuber. Happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you.
This is actually shameful until you mentioned it. I did not. I totally forgot today was Star Wars Day.
Well, it's good because obviously Star Wars Day is the creation of an evil woke corporation.
Disney, I know.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
bent on spreading quality animation and live action franchises to the people. Evil, truly evil.
Gina Carino. So that ended up being she ended up being a cause celeb on the conservative social media universe.
Oh yeah, we lost you for a second there, but you're talking about Gina Carano,
Yes,
former MMA fighter and movie star, and
yeah.
once beloved Star Wars character, and then split the fan base over her comments about mask wearing and COVID,
among other things. But I think that her biggest penalty. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think her biggest issue was that Disney had asked her to get off of Twitter, and she refused, and she kept tweeting. I think there was another example, Letitia Wright, who was tweeting about anti-vax stuff. I believe Disney asked her to get off of Twitter. She did so. That was the end of that story. Everything was fine. If Gina Carano had simply done that, I think Disney would have been fine. I think that the fact that she disobeyed what they had asked her to do was a problem.
Right. And I think that point actually brought a lot of conservatives over to the side of it being okay, because they had also asked the lead, Pablo, I've forgotten his name for some reason. Who's the lead of the Mandalorian?
Pedro Pascal, right?
Pedro Pascal, right.
Correct, yeah.
He had posted some political things, and I believe they asked him to stop, and he backed off that as well. And you mentioned
Correct.
Letitia Wright.
Yeah, Pedro Pascal was doing, I believe, left-wing sort of political points.
Right.
Backed off. Yeah, that's exactly right. Letitia Wright as well had backed off. I think that was the real issue with Gina Carano, was when Disney had asked her just to stop it. Don't make this an issue. She just ignored them, and that was sort of seen as a sign of greater irrationality.
Right. But that is a rallying cry now for the right, the anti-cancel culture, anti-wokeness
right
messaging of the right, which was part of what your segment was about today, the move by the GOP against woke corporations, part 2, apparently. So is there anything you want to expand on there?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to keep in mind that certain corporations, it's certainly not fossil fuel companies. That is not a GOP target. It's not certainly not those are not woke corporations per se that the GOP is targeting. One thing I did not mention, because this wasn't a time in the segment, is that I do think that there is kind of a racial element to the targeting of big tech. So it was in 2015 or 2016 that Donald Trump, as a candidate for president, went on Steve Bannon's, I believe either his podcast or his radio show. At the time, Bannon had not yet been Trump's campaign manager. And Bannon complained to Trump about Silicon Valley and how there were too many Asians in Silicon Valley. And how this was a problem for America, was that there were too many Asians in Silicon Valley. Yes. And Trump's response was, well, they were the good ones. But, right. Bannon just...
And happy Asian Pacific History Month to all our friends and viewers, by the way, on this note.
Yeah, actually, Heritage Month, correct, yeah. But, he said that they were the good ones, and that wasn't... Even that patronizing racist comment wasn't enough for Bannon. Bannon kind of kept at it. And it is a fact that, unlike the fossil fuel industry, immigrants historically have always made a huge contribution to Silicon Valley, going back to Andrew Grove in the invention of Intel and the Pentium chip. But if you look at Google's, one of their co-founders was an immigrant born in the Soviet Union. Two of Google, I mean, Google's current CEO and Microsoft CEO is an Indian American. I do think that that is also a factor with big tech as well. I think I think we were sort of discussing, I think it's part of a larger GOP hatred of science. When scientists look like Ed Harris in Apollo 13, the GOP was all in on science. Now that's certainly not the case. The diversity of the scientific workforce, I think, is a problem with the GOP. It's not a problem in the fossil fuel industry, however.
They enjoy having a diverse workforce in the fossil fuel industry.
Well, no, I said it's not a diverse workforce in the fossil fuel industry. It's very much, it's kind of like the factory work where the vast majority of workers are white males, non-college educated, very much the GOP base. And that was the case with factory workers today. I mean, it's 71% white. If you watch the movie Nomadland, you actually don't see a whole lot of diversity in that Amazon plant. You see some, but not a whole lot in that Amazon plant. 70% of factory workers are white. Majority, a strong solid majority, are male. And in some ways, that reflects the CEO culture of America, where 7 out of 10 CEOs are white males. And that's what my point was, that what Pat Buchanan kind of figured out was that you could actually kind of unify these two poles in a way that might seem for Democrats to be hypocritical, but for Republicans would be understood as not hypocritical. It was basically a kind of white identity politics, where you protect white male CEOs on the top, and then you also protect overwhelmingly white male factory workers, and then also add that anti-immigration, anti-women's legislation, reproductive rights, anti-minority rights, etc. And so that was really the fusion of white identity politics that Pat Buchanan pioneered. What he didn't have, as we talked about in the segment, was he didn't have the internet the way it is today.
Right. And no one ever went entirely broke banking on xenophobia. But do you think come midterms, this strategy is actually going to pay off for the GOP?
No, so there are a couple of aspects, I think, with the midterms. The midterms will entirely be a referendum on Joe Biden and the economy and COVID. I think that the biggest issue for Joe Biden right now is, it appears to me that we're not going to achieve herd immunity through vaccinations. That is really depressing to think about. If you look at like India, what's really heartbreaking, when you see all those people dying over there, is that there's effectively a cure for this. There are vaccines,
and masks,
masks and things like that that could be employed. But in America, it's even worse. On some level, that we have all these things available so freely, easily to us, and so many Americans are choosing not to do so.
Right. So, it's a wonder. I have friends in Europe and Canada who are amazed by the availability of vaccines here. There's a 2, 3, in some cases even 4-month wait between shots in Canada and Europe right now.
It's pretty bad. America's vaccine rollout is the envy of the entire planet, and it's been done very well by this administration. However, I do have sort of a suspicion that a lot of the anti-mask stuff, I think you saw maybe Tucker Carlson was saying how you should call the police if you see a child with a mask.
Right.
You should attack people who have masks on. And Ben Shapiro was also repeating the same thing about, that if you see somebody wearing a mask, that means that they're liberated, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I do wonder if a lot of what the conservative movement is doing right now is they are purposely trying to hamper the Biden recovery from the pandemic.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time the GOP has pulled out of that playbook. You remember at the turn of the century, because we're both quite old, when about $500 million trash talking the economy until the tech bubble burst.
Correct. Yeah, it burst actually during the Florida recount, if I remember. That's exactly when it happened. And then he was able to use that tech bubble bursting to pass those egregious tax cuts. So it all kind of worked out for him in that regard. But, I do think that there is some of that where I think the GOP does not want Biden to succeed, does not want America to succeed. And the reality is Biden's going to need these vaccinations to continue apace for the economy to recover, and that's what he will be judged on. He will be judged on that specifically. Obviously, the stimulus checks are going to go out with if he gets this tremendous infrastructure bill passed. That's something that I think will generate enthusiasm in the liberal base for him. But that's really where that kind of comes out at. I don't think that these other issues are going to be particularly important, except maybe at riling up the GOP base. But I think even there, it's much harder. I mean, we talked about how Trump has a blog now and how pathetic that is. I mean, Peter Thiel could not. Peter Thiel has the money to create any number of platforms. I mean, he could. I mean, I think Thiel probably has enough money to buy one of these social media platforms.
Right. There are literal just templates for social media platforms for sale out there. But
yes.
Trump somehow
and Peter Thiel
doesn't
to buy every single one of those templates, by the way. So he has that much money. And so it's not like access to capital. Is interesting that Trump was not able to pull that together.
right.
But the only thing I would say that Trump was actually ever able to pull together were those rallies. That was the one thing where there was some skill at pulling those things together. And even there, I think it was sort of questionable. If you remember the Tulsa rally where nobody showed up.
Well, apparently all his energy is going towards building a dock at Mar-a-Lago for security reasons.
For security reasons, yes, exactly. So I guess he's getting taxpayer money for that dock as well, right?
Because that's why he's couching it as a security issue, so that gunboats can be parked there to protect the former beloved president of the United States. His neighbors must be having a horrible, horrible time.
Yeah, I suspect that's definitely the case. But I think I don't think as bad as the time they're having. I don't think it's as bad as the time he's having. I think he's having actually a much worse time.
Oh yes, poor Donald Trump.
Yes, but I think that the reality is that I think Josh Hawley knows this. I think a lot of Republicans know this. They really need Trump back on Twitter for him to do what he did before. And I alluded to this. The birther conspiracy was really where Trump figured out how to use Twitter very effectively. Where I think he was able to tweet out that conspiracy theory. He saw the media reacting to it. He saw the media covering it, and he knew that once he had a he said on Obama's birth certificate, he had won. And I think that's definitely the case. If you notice with every conspiracy theory they've had, they don't need to necessarily prove the conspiracy theory. They just need the media to cover it as a legitimate point of view. That's exactly what happened. And there's no other way for media to cover it other than a legitimate point of view.
Well, that's the beauty of the conspiracy theory, is that you don't have to prove it. You just put it out there, and then people on the internet will prove it will quote unquote prove it for you.
Right.
It's much like any sort of sci-fi fandom. They will just fill in the blanks.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think that also I would argue a lot, for the most part, nobody really believes the conspiracy theory. Very few people actually do. The conspiracy theory is actually an excuse for other things. Mm-hmm. I think it's actually, for example, I think people don't want to necessarily say, I don't like all these brown people in my neighborhood. I don't like the direction America is going in with, the transgender youth, with all the immigrants, et cetera, Black Lives Matter. It all bothers me. People really can't say that. It's much easier for them to say, "Oh, the deep state is destroying America." That's actually more. It's claiming belief in a conspiracy theory. I would argue is actually more socially acceptable for people than claiming actual racist beliefs in a lot of company. And I think in other cases that there are a lot of people who may emotionally feel something, but they can't intellectually verbalize it. So as a result, the conspiracy theory allows them some way to verbalize something that they're feeling, but they can't quite articulate.
Is the conspiracy theory the new I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative?
Right. That's basically, I remember hearing that for years among Republicans. Yes, that's exactly right.
Right.
But now people who, by the way, are socially liberal and fiscally conservative, they're all pretty much Democrats.
Right. So. Well, the Democrats have been, let's not say fiscally conservative, fiscally responsible.
Right. Right. So people say Colin Powell, who very much actually said exactly those words in the early '90s, is now fully a Democrat.
Right.
I think and if you look at how well Joe Biden did with moderate Republicans, with suburbanites, that cohort that actually did believe that is now fully in the Democrat camp. But I do think that the conspiracy theories allow people to sort of say that they are supporting Trump for these reasons
Right.
when those are not actually the reasons. And I think that the real reasons are something that they either don't want to say or they somehow can't articulate or
Right.
say.
Right.
Um,
Much the
so
way people would claim they were socially liberal, but not want to fund any sort of socially liberal program or
right.
progress whatsoever.
Correct. And so for example, I would argue that some of the conspiracy theories on the right about the vaccine, I don't know if you saw that Orange County supervisor who was talking about tracing, was the government able to trace people through the vaccine,
Oh,
which is a nanotechnology that does not exist, by the way.
yes, yes.
I think it only exists in the world of Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I don't think it exists in the actual
It might be
world.
in the Mission Impossible
I think the Mission Impossible series
franchise.
does have it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they do. They have that. But yeah, but I think that one of the things is I think a lot of conservatives are angry at the vaccine companies for not announcing their vaccines before the election. I think that is something that they're very upset about. Because
Right.
I do think it's possible that if those vaccines had been announced before the election, I do think Trump would probably have won that election. He certainly would have won the electoral college. And I think that
It's
a lot of
possible.
conservatives a lot of conservatives know this and they're angry about that. I do think if they had, let's say Pfizer and Moderna had announced it like 2 weeks earlier, and we actually know that Trump was pressuring them to pre-release that they had the vaccine before the election. But if they had done so, I think it would have caused an even greater backlash.
Well, it's
It
not as though big pharma is known for its rampant liberalism.
You're right. No,
So I
that's
imagine they announced when it was ready,
correct.
and it just
Yes.
had, the timing just was off for the Republicans. So
Yeah, it was, but I think that that's actually an area of anger. But I think that that's fueling some of the conservative conspiracy theories.
sure.
But that's basically, I guess about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess to wrap up, is there anything else you want to
Well,
ask?
I'm drinking a mint green Northwest mint green tea, and I believe you probably have mint as well.
Yeah, some mint green
I
tea.
know you have to run. You gonna watch the Bad Batch?
I'm undecided about it. To be honest with you, I really like the end of the Clone Wars, and I don't feel like there's any need to move beyond it. To quite frankly, I kind of wish things would just end the way when they end well. Like for example, Arrested Development had actually a very nice finale at the end of season 3. There was no need to go back to that extra season. Parks and Rec I thought had a wonderful finale at the end of season 4. There was no need to continue the show beyond that. I kind of wish sometimes shows just accepted that they were over and let that be the end of it. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
do. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll watch it, or maybe
The
I'll
the
not.
the Simpsons rule, but I don't think the Star Wars franchise has quite hit season 8 of the Simpsons just yet. So
Yes. Well,
they're
I think that the final of The Simpsons should have been the behind the music episode,
right.
which I
Exactly.
believe was what, like season 9. I think that was when that was.
Oh, was it
Uh,
9? Was it 8 or
I think
9? Yeah.
maybe 8 or 9. Some one of there in there, but yeah, but that's where I put it. But maybe I'll watch it. Who knows? Anyway,
Anyway, for Chaitanya Commodore and me, Shire Puntergason, thank you very much for joining us. Tune in on most Tuesdays to see Che on The Beat with Ari Melber. Have a good night.
you too. Take care.